Omnichannel retailing is the latest evolution in the world for retail operations, and one that retailers need to be taking seriously given the current digital environment and rapid acceleration. So what is omnichannel retailing, and what differences are at play when we look at the different generational groups? That and much more are just ahead on this brand new episode of The Digital Retailer. Hello and welcome everyone to a brand new episode of The Digital Retailer. My name is Mark Babin, your host. Thank you so much for joining me on this great episode. It's going to be a fantastic discussion. It's a good one you've tuned in for. So again, thank you so much for being here. Now, as you heard from the introduction to the episode, this pod is all about omnichannel retailing. From its significance in the current retail landscape to how the different demographics interact and behave, we will be covering a lot of ground on this discussion and hopefully giving you a better understanding of how important omnichannel retailing is, especially in today's rapidly evolving world. Now, for a topic this complex, we are very excited to welcome a big hitter within the retail industry, Ricardo Belmar. Ricardo is a globally recognized retail influencer and expert, actively appearing on stages around the world to speak on the industry's hottest topics. He also hosts a popular retail podcast, which you should check out, The Retail Razor Show, which is available, of course, on all major podcast platforms. Definitely check them out. And as if that's not enough to keep this man busy, he is also the director of partner marketing for retail and CPG at Microsoft. Just a small little footnote there to the resume. Love it. Ricardo, welcome so much to the show. Thank you so much for being here. Really looking forward to this discussion with you today.
Thank you, Mark. It's a real pleasure to be here. I hope I can live up to the great intro there, especially on one of my favorite topics here, omnichannel retail.
Perfect. Yeah, it's something that's definitely a hot buzzword right now, and we're seeing it pop up from show to show. And I know you've been at most of them, if not speaking at most of them. So I'm really looking forward to what you have to say. So with that, let's dive right in. I wanted to start this discussion by not only identifying what omnichannel retailing is for those listening, but also to break it down and how it differs from multi-channel retailing. I think we often see these two being blended and blurred together. And while the differences from what I've read and what I've researched, they do seem to be subtle, I think they have a big impact on the strategic direction and, of course, the customer journey. So to kick us off on this podcast, can you help us to identify what the key differences are and then the role that we've seen both take in the evolution of consumer shopping, especially, of course, in this rapidly evolving digital age?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Mark, that this is there are a lot of similarities, but also I think a lot of confusion between terms. That when we talk about multi-channel retail versus omni-channel retail, and to really make things interesting, I'll throw out another term that gets mixed in with these, and that's cross-channel retail.
Yes.
Which, interestingly enough, is one of those that I think gets used less and less as omni-channel kind of takes over the world. But and also, I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't add, there are also lots of people in retail who just don't like that term, omni-channel, and would rather use something else. But I think whether you like the term or not, it definitely represents something important for retailers. And it's probably, like you said, it's good to understand what are the differences between some of these concepts. So the way I would describe it, multi-channel evolved from how retailers really over time started opening up new sales channels after new sales channel to interact with and transact commerce with customers. E-commerce is obviously one channel, for example. Mobile commerce is another channel. So there's lots of things that way, and it has a lot to do from the retailer's perspective of where and how consumers buy from them from channel to channel. So once upon a time, right, consumers used to basically stay within one channel. They might buy products from a retailer in a store. They might buy online from them through a digital channel. But over time, what's happened? Consumers have realized that the channel doesn't really matter. What it's really just commerce to the consumer. So consumers just want to buy things, and they want to research and discover and shop for things. And how they do that, they may jump from channel to channel. So this concept of shopping across multiple channels I think at one point was a little bit foreign to retailers because they kind of got used to the idea that they'd have one set of customers that like to shop in store, or they have probably another set of customers that prefer to shop digitally. And so from the retailer, that multi-channel strategy had more to do with how are they connecting with customers in each siloed channel. And I mentioned that other term, cross-channel, before. I think where that came in is when consumers started jumping from channel to channel. So the same consumer now would suddenly, might start a shopping journey on the digital channel, but they might end up purchasing in store. So how did retailers look at this? Well, at first they kind of thought these were two different people and didn't quite catch the concept. Over time, as retailers got smarter with the data they had, they realized, this is the same person, and they like to jump from channel to channel. So multi-channel became a strategy to address how are you going to interact with those consumers that wanted to shop across different channels. And like I said, any given consumer, might start that journey in one channel and go to another, and they jump from channel to channel. But so another interesting thing happened on the consumer side, and that's that consumers, if you ask any shopper, right, they have no idea what a channel is.
Yeah,
it's no distinction, right, to the consumer. They're just buying things. It's just commerce, right? And to a consumer, it seems perfectly natural that if you start shopping on a retailer's website and you're in that e-commerce channel, you might add some things to a shopping basket, but you might not finish that transaction, right? You might say, I'd like to go see some of these products. I'm going to visit that retailer's store. I still have those things in my cart. And I go to the store as a consumer. I might, pull out the retailer's mobile app while I'm in the store. And of course, to the consumer, the expectation is, well, if I was shopping online with you before, I should be able to see everything that I looked at and that I had in that shopping basket on my phone while I'm in the store. And if I find something else that I like in the store, I might want to buy all of these things in a single transaction. So multi-channel kind of evolved into this omni-channel mode, which really had a new implication from the retailer's perspective. And that's that not only will the consumer jump from one channel to another and use all of these channels to shop, they expect to do it seamlessly and in an integrated way so that it doesn't matter which channel they started in and which one they finished in. They still want to just complete a transaction. In some cases, that example I just gave, they're actually using multiple channels at the same time to complete that transaction. And that's the consumer expectation that we now call omni-channel. And it's become super critical for retailers because what have retailers that look at their data learned? They've learned that those tend to be the most valuable customers. The ones that do this and shop this way, they tend to buy more, they have a higher average transaction value, and they represent a much larger lifetime customer value to the retailer. And that's what really makes it important for them. And the ability to deliver that promise of a seamless cross-channel approach as one unified transaction. That's really what omni-channel represents now. And in fact, you'll see some people refer to this as unified commerce as well, as if we're going to throw around a few more terms just to confuse things. But that's really what it represents now, I think, for retailers. And that's what distinguishes it from these older terms of cross-channel and multi-channel.
Yeah, that really clarifies that storyline of how it developed. I love that. It's easy to see where the confusion with all these different terms come in because we may see them in different parts of the world. They're different, using different in industries. But I think it's fair to say that it's more like omni-channel retailing is more than an extended version of multi-channel. It is its own thing now, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. And I'd probably add that, these other terms like unified commerce, they may actually do a better job of representing the differences. In part, I think it's not insignificant that the word channel, right, in a term like unified commerce is removed, because at the end of the day, like I mentioned earlier, right, the consumer doesn't care about channels. If you take any shopper in a store and ask them, do you know what multi-channel is or what omni-channel is? They'll probably look at you like you have three heads, because what on earth does that mean? They're just shopping. It's just commerce. I'm just going to buy something. Using a term that doesn't have the word channel in it, I think helps represent the fact that at the end of the day, the consumer really is the channel. It's not about sales channels. That's a very retailer-centric way of looking at things. If you're going to be customer-centric, you should just be thinking about commerce and transactions.
Yeah, everything rotating around the customer, which has all the
Exactly.
power, and that's what dictates the change and the trends that develop. Yeah, that really highlights it nicely.
Exactly.
So you touched on it there, and of course, it's the meat of this discussion today, and it's looking at how different shoppers interact throughout that retail commerce experience, because the generational gaps, some are more tech friendly, some are more traditional. I think we see significant gaps, and retailers will know, of course, how to market to different generations and different demographics. What are the key differences that you see in this new approach, in this omni-channel way, that you're seeing the different generations interact throughout the shopping experience?
Yeah, I think especially now with these last couple of years in the pandemic, we've learned quite a bit about how different generations like to shop. And I think what's interesting too is that, I'll go into more specifics, but what we knew about different generations and how they shopped pre-pandemic, I think has changed a bit because of new shopping habits that formed during the pandemic. But fundamentally, it all really comes down to how each generation views the use of digital technology in that shopping journey. I think not too many years ago in the industry, right, we all started talking about how millennials were changing the way people shop, and we're making retailers think differently about how to incorporate those digital shopping channels. I think we can kind of credit the millennial generation for being the one to really push retailers into those digital channels, to realize that, e-commerce was a critical channel. Being on mobile was super important, and retailers had to really pay attention to this. And then Gen Z started shopping, and Gen Z added even another twist to this, in that not only were they much more naturally inclined to shop in those digital channels, they still wanted to have the physical interaction. So where millennials started taking retailers down a path where that the physical store channel was maybe a little less relevant, what was more important was digital. Gen Z kind of brought it back and said, if you can't combine both, they're not going to shop with you. And those were, I think, the main trends going into the pandemic. Now, other interesting things that happen, I think most retailers have forgotten about Gen Xers, which is probably fair. And myself being a Gen Xer myself, I kind of feel like everybody tends to forget
Feeling left out.
Generation. For better or worse. But what's interesting is, I think, if you look at Gen X as a shopping demographic, you can probably divide the group into two areas: the kind that really identifies with the way millennials shop, and then there's the kind that identifies maybe a little bit more with what we tend to think of boomers and that generation as a traditional in-store shopper that is maybe a little less inclined to pursue those digital channels. But what's interesting is, during the pandemic, when everybody got forced to adopt more digital shopping habits, all of these generations got used to these digital channels. So I can't tell you how many stories I hear from friends and other people in the industry who will talk about a parent and, will say they never used to go to an e-commerce site, and now they're buying their groceries online. When did that happen? So there's been a fair mix of this. And I think, if anything else, it's reinforced that for retailers, you do have to look at your customer data. It's ever so much more important now than it was before to really understand who your customers are and what their preferences are. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to personalization. I think every consumer feels that they want a much more personalized experience with a retailer, and the retailers that do that better, that's where they're going to put their loyalty with. And I think that's true for the millennial generation, for Gen Xers and boomers. I think with Gen Z, there's some interesting things, and I'd say this is probably still debated a lot, is how Gen Zers really express brand loyalty. I would claim that if I go back to Gen Xers, there's a lot of traditional brand loyalty, especially when it comes to categories like apparel, where there's a lot of loyalty to a brand, and it's very difficult to get people to move away from those brands. Millennials, I think, brought in an approach that retailers would say, if your digital channels were stronger, you'd essentially gain loyalty from that generation. But then with Gen Z, it seems more like they're much more readily willing to switch brands if the experience of that combined digital and physical journey is better. And there's a lot less brand loyalty in that sense. And then another kind of variable that got thrown into this, I think, that also varies by generation, especially if we look in the grocery segment, and the idea of private lines in grocery stores, which used to be a pretty good percentage of sales. I think those increased during the pandemic, partly because of brand shortages on shelves, but also because so many of those products, people were suddenly realizing, they're not so bad. They're actually as good as the brands I'm used to. Why am I being loyal to a brand that might cost me more and isn't always available? So all of these factors are things that retailers really need to look at in understanding their customer data and how they're going to address each of these different customer segments. And I think the key thing is that when retailers start looking at the technology they're going to use to personalize that shopping experience, they have to realize that that personalization, it's not only going to vary by the generational demographic, but even within each one, we've started to realize that it's a little difficult to generalize. You can take a survey across 20 Gen Zers and you might get 10 different answers of what they expect from an experience. So it's become a little bit more complex for retailers, and it just emphasizes the need to really dive into the customer data every retailer has and really understand what is that telling you about your customer mix.
Yeah, and with all these big gaps within the different generations, how are you seeing in your work and the conversations you're having, how are you seeing retailers react to these different generational gaps? Are we seeing like unique business models and processes developed for each generation, or are we seeing more of a generic approach here? Are people just playing it safe? Does it really depend on what their industry is or what their product is? What are you seeing in the market?
Yeah, I'd say there's definitely a difference in what product categories we're talking about. So
Mm-hmm.
one example, you mentioned different business models, and that's a really interesting area because we've obviously seen a rise in subscription models, across very different product categories, and different generations are much more willing to adopt this idea of a regular subscription for a product category for consumable items they know they're going to keep buying. And it has a lot to do with this idea of how important is the convenience factor to that generation of shopper.
Mm-hmm.
And convenience means different things to different generations. You could argue that for millennials, for example, who are like to do a lot of different things, that we've always talked about how experiences matter more than things and stuff for the millennial generation. What does that mean when it comes to shopping? Well, a subscription offers a lot of convenience then on items that probably to most people in that generation, they view as it's just something I have to have. I don't derive an interesting experience from that product. So why don't I want something that's going to make it easier for me to acquire that product on a regular basis? If a retailer is just willing to keep sending it to me and I'm okay with the price,
Mm-hmm.
that's a win for me. But now you look at other generations that might say, a Gen X is probably more likely to say, well, wait, how much am I spending on these subscriptions? And do I really need more subscriptions? I'm going to look a little more closely at that and figure out which ones matter most for the value they bring, more so than the convenience of just getting it. And then you look at a Gen Z customer and present subscription models, and it's more about, well, am I, is that a convenience I'm getting, or am I just kind of losing out on the ability to really pick and choose what I want? So you get different results that way, and a retailer needs to adapt to that and know who they're targeting for each of these things. So it also has implications on, from what I see, what technology solutions are retailers looking for that are going to help them make these distinctions, using the customer data they have, using some outside data they might need to bring into their systems, and how do they analyze that? Do they have people who can look at this data and get the right insights to know how to personalize it to each one? And it's a tricky thing, but it's definitely something that there's a lot of activity right now with retailers and understanding. And originally we saw this a lot in how retailers wanted to market to drive traffic to their e-commerce sites, but now there's a realization that it's really independent of the e-commerce channel. It has more to do with just the overall engagement with your customer base.
Yeah. Is there a right way? I mean, I love how you touched on data, because I think data is becoming, first party data in particular, like owned data, not industry, is really becoming more valuable. Is that really the secret sauce to this whole thing, is really having as much customer first party data as you can possibly have? Is that the secret?
I think there's two things. Or two parts to it, if you will. So one part, yes, absolutely. Having that first party data is much more important now than it used to be. And as every marketer knows, with cookies going away and changing privacy rules across different platforms and devices, it's becoming much harder to rely on that third party data. So yes, first party data, absolutely critical. But then the second part is, it's one thing to have the data, but then what do you do with it? How do you use that first party data to get the insights that you want? That data without the ability to derive the right insights that you can apply to your marketing to customers, to the way you transact with them, the way you present your brand to those customers. without those insights, that data is not doing anything for you. It's not really
Hmm.
working for you. So, I think it is very easy to say today retail is absolutely becoming a data business, and how you use that data is critical. So, what does that mean in a practical sense for retailers? And this is where I end up engaging with a lot of folks is, you need the right technology to help you build a customer data platform. And that customer data platform, it's always growing. It's always ingesting more data from whatever first party means you have to collect data. You've got transactional data, you have all your marketing data, you have data on how customers come to your website, how they engage with your mobile app if you're doing a mobile app, and if you're a brand going through that also goes through wholesale relationships, how are you getting data from those relationships, and all of this working together to try to understand, what's my customer interested in? What are their preferences? What's their, if I look at the history of what they've bought, what is that going to tell me about what they might buy in the future if I give them the right incentive to buy something, or if I present it the right way? So those kind of technologies are critical. The ones that let you derive those customer insights based on the customer data you have. And then along with that, I would say that the types of solutions and technology you use to surface that data to all of your various operational teams. One thing that I think every retailer learned during the pandemic is that you can't take 6 months to roll out a new capability anymore. The 6 month, 6 weeks is the new 6 months, so to speak. And that, if it takes you longer than 6 weeks, you're taking too long. And there's also the realization that if I don't get to 100% in 6 weeks, if I'm only 85, 90%, that's okay.
Hmm.
I can just take another 6 weeks to iterate and gain another 5% towards that completion. But each one of those iterations helps me better understand a customer. So that also means you need the right tools to help you move at that pace. And from a technology point of view, the other big trend I'm seeing there that has a significant impact, I think, in everything around customer data insights is the use of low code and no code technologies that
Hmm.
quickly help people extract data from those data sets, put them in a dashboard, create very rapid reporting so that not just, the people in store ops can use this, the people in marketing can use it. Your executive team can get the right summary so they understand what direction the business is going in a really rapid kind of deployment. So the combination of these technologies around data, and of course, AI has a huge role in this. I can't think of any solutions right now really in this space that are not leveraging AI and or machine learning to help with that insight extraction from the data, and then being able to clean that data is also another factor of. I've seen so many examples where retailers get kind of bogged down in data issues where, if you're a customer for a retailer and you've bought something on their e-commerce site, you probably gave them an email address when you open that transaction. But then if you go visit them in a store, you're probably not using an email address. You might be giving them a credit card
Hmm.
of some kind. So how does a retailer match that in-store transaction with the e-commerce transaction? And what if that customer might be a member of your loyalty program? They might not. And if they then at a future date buy something through your mobile app, did they use the same email address? Lots of people have multiple email addresses. So how do you combine and sync to know that this is a single customer? And then another good example where these AI systems come in, one customer, if you're an apparel brand and you have um, merchandise that might be for men versus women. Well, if someone buys women's clothes and men's clothes, uh, do you know who they really are? Who are they shopping for? Which one of those purchases was for themselves versus for a family member? And if you don't know, then when you try to market to them, how do you know what merchandise to present in that email to entice them? If you're sending this, to a family member and you're sending it to a husband, for example, and a couple, and you send the marketing material on women's dresses. Is that really the right marketing pitch to make? It might be, depending on the time of year, right? And whether they're looking to buy something as a gift, or maybe it's not. And if you send the wrong thing, you're putting off that customer and you're probably encouraging them to stop engaging with you. So getting the insights right is absolutely critical. And it really requires a combination of the right technology and the right people using that technology to get it right.
So for those retailers looking as kind of first steps, if they're moving from a single channel or multi-channel to an omni-channel operation and a process, is that then really the first steps, is to find these solutions and to really focus around these technologies and innovations? Is that kind of the first step then?
It's part of one. I think, what makes this challenging for a
Mhm.
lot of retailers is that I think there's no single step that is going to put some magic dust over everything and make it all omni-channel suddenly.
Darn.
It really depends on where is the retailer currently. So a legacy retailer, let's say, that has a lot of legacy systems probably has a lot more work to do to
Mhm.
update those systems to get them to be integrated, to deliver on that seamless experience, and to then build that customer data platform from all these various different systems. That's probably the new piece that most retailers need to put in. But whatever technology they pick, they have to understand, right, how is it going to get the data from all these legacy systems? Younger retailers, in a sense, have a little bit of an advantage here because they probably don't have as many legacy systems. They might play nicer with the other systems they have to put in. Um, but then, that's the technology part of it. So for all of these things, I think there's always at least two sides to the story. One is the technology piece, but then the other is the people piece.
Mhm.
And
Great point.
a retailer has to look and say, well, do I have the right people in my organization that know how to deal with these technologies, that know how to not just implement them, but how to maintain them and how to use them? And it's probably different types of people. You see a lot of retailers trying to recruit people with a data science background to be those people that will use these tools to look at the data and get the right customer insights to the rest of the organization. So those roles become critical, and those are new roles for retailers. So there's a combination, I think, of having the right people side of the equation and the right technology to get into this process of converting yourself into an omni-channel retailer.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of it will lie in truly having that as part of the culture within that retail operation, because if it's not a full
Absolutely.
commit, if they're holding on to these legacy things, like you said, then it's like switching a brand. If you hold on to a couple things, it's never going to completely go over. Now, in the
Right.
conversations you've had, are you seeing that switch? Are you seeing people become proactive and anticipatory rather than just reacting?
Yes, and I think you can probably pretty easily point to retailers who have successfully done that.
Yeah.
Like with so many other things during the pandemic, it's exaggerated and expanded the visibility to a lot of these things. So if you were to make the list of who are the retailers over the last couple of years that have really been the winners, that have just seen explosive growth, customers love them, it's actually retailers who prior to the pandemic were already investing
Yeah.
in these technologies to enable these seamless omni-channel shopping experiences. Those are the retailers that are the real winners over the last couple of years. And I think you can the reason we can declare them winners is now that we're not looking at stores being closed anymore. Nobody's experiencing these lockdowns anymore, any of these kinds of things. People are able to go shop. So given those circumstances, if you look at where are the stores and brands that they're still shopping at that are still seeing growth year over year, even when measured against those explosive months over the last couple of years for those retailers, those are the ones, and they tend to be big box and mass merchandise stores. It's names like Target, Walmart, Best Buy, Amazon, of course. Even as their growth might look like could be slowing this year, it's only because they're comparing against such an explosive set of months in 2021 that had such massive growth for them. But then the flip side is when we look at who are the retailers that are still struggling, the ones that didn't see an increase over the last couple of years and are still struggling to get good sales numbers, it's the ones that didn't make that investment. It's the ones that didn't put in the right systems and hire the right people to get these omni-channel experiences going for themselves. And they're still struggling to do it now. So because they're late and a bit behind in those investments, they're the ones that are still struggling, to experience that success. And then there's many retailers kind of in between those two
Yeah.
states where they started the investment and they're still on that journey, right? They're still developing the tools, they're still deploying them and getting them in place so they can deliver those experiences.
Yeah, and a lot more solutions coming to the market to aid in that and to help it.
Absolutely.
No, that's really, really well said. I think it's fantastic. Good call to action there. I think it really gets people motivated to move in this direction. I know I've learned a lot just listening to you today, and that's brilliant. So, Ricardo, thank you so very much for your time today and for lending us these expert opinions. Hopefully, lots for the retailers listening to take action on, as you said, and to keep moving forward in that direction. So, again, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Mark, for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And for those of you watching today, thank you very much for joining me on this episode today to talk omni-channel retailing. Again, like Ricardo said, another term to understand, but really how he explained it is brilliant. It's a simple process. It's just a matter of a customer-centric model. That's all we're living in, is all the operations have to revolve, of course, around the consumer and the customer. So that's all it is. Nothing to overcomplicate, but I think some really nice actionable steps there from Ricardo. So again, thank you for joining me on this episode. Hopefully lots for you to take away. I've got some notes here myself. Hopefully you do too. But again, thank you for being here. If you do want to learn more about what we do at Anyline in the retail space, please feel free to go to our website, anyline.com/retail. Lots of information there, downloadable assets, some fun stuff to check out. So definitely have a look. And of course, a big shout out to Ricardo for joining me on this episode. Of course, the Retail Razor podcast, something you should definitely check out. I'll put the LinkedIn description for Ricardo and myself. You can contact us there if you want to add to the conversation or ask any questions about what you heard today. You can reach out to either of us directly or head and just leave a comment below the video and we'll address them there. Lots of channels to reach out to us on. There you go. So have a fantastic day wherever in the world you may be. Thank you for tuning into the Digital Retailer Podcast. We'll see you on a new episode very soon. Have a great day, everyone.